to start watching the series. And this program, I'm thrilled to say, is coming to you from the Ending Mass Incarceration team at CBST. And I want to invite Lee Goldberg to open our program for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi James. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on College Behind Bars, hosted by Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, the world's largest LGBTQ synagogue. As Rabbi James said, I'm Lee Goldberg, and along with Lori Magid, we chair CBST's Ending Mass Incarceration team. College Behind Bars is a documentary about the Barred Prison Initiative, BPI, among the largest, longest standing, and most innovative college and prison programs in the United States, which enrolls incarcerated women and men in academic programs that culminate in degrees from Bard College. We're so fortunate to have joining us this evening two graduates of BPI, Tamika Graham and Dyjuan Tatro, as well as the founder and executive director of BPI, Max Kenner. Tamika Graham is a formerly incarcerated woman who was released in 2017 after serving a 9-year sentence. While incarcerated, Tamika graduated from BPI with an associate's degree in liberal arts. Since her release, Tamika has devoted herself to not only making a change in her community, but also making a change in our nation by advocating for an end to mass incarceration and an end to homelessness, as well as passionately advocating for youth because she strongly believes they represent our future. Tamika is also a zealous advocate for access to higher education for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people because she knows that education is a gateway to social and economic mobility. Tamika actively utilizes her public speaking skills, lived experience, and humble personality to motivate others to action. She is engaged in advocacy with Equity Alliance of Staten Island, BPI, Close Rikers, and other campaigns and organizations. Tamika is currently the Canvas Director at JustLeadershipUSA and the lead national organizer for Beyond the Box initiative. Before joining JustLeadershipUSA, she was teaching high school equivalency classes at the Brownsville Community Justice Center and Dreams Youth Build in Crown Heights with BPI TASC program. Tamika is also a Rehabilitation Through the Arts alumna and sits on their Alumni Advisory Committee. Dyjuan Tatro is the Government Affairs and Advancement Officer at BPI and an active member of the Fortune Society's Board of Directors. Prior to his work with BPI, he advised Representative Sean Patrick Maloney on criminal justice policy. As a BPI alumnus and someone who spent 12 years in prison, Dyjuan leverages his education and experience to articulate the monumental failures of mass incarceration and over-policing. Dyjuan brings a critical perspective to criminal justice reform, advocating for and working to enact sweeping changes at the municipal, state, and federal levels through successful allocation of public funds towards reentry services and college and prison. He has worked on national social impact campaigns designed to shift public opinion in favor of Pell restoration and to humanize incarcerated people in the public consciousness. While incarcerated, Dyjuan was a member of the BPI debate team that defeated Harvard University in 2015. Originally from Albany, Dyjuan now resides here in the city, where last year the New York City Council honored him for his work. A leading advocate for the restoration of college and prison, Max Kenner frequently speaks publicly on issues of education and criminal justice. Max is co-founder of the Consortium for the Liberal Arts in Prison, which supports colleges and universities in establishing college in prison projects nationwide, and also of the Bard Micro College, which establishes rigorous tuition-free college opportunities within urban areas in partnership with community-based institutions. At Bard College, Max serves as Vice President for Institutional Initiatives and advisor to the President on Public Policy and College Affairs. He has been a fellow in residence at the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American history at Harvard University, and has served on Governor Andrew Cuomo's New York State Council on Community Reentry and Reintegration since its inception. Max is a recipient of many awards, including the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library's New Frontier Award and the Smithsonian American Ingenuity Award in Education. Tamika, Dyjuan, Max, we're so excited and grateful you're here with us tonight. For those CBST members who joined our town hall back in April, you'll recall that we've been planning to do this panel for a while. At the time, none of us knew that just over a month later, George Floyd's murder would prompt a national reckoning on the structural racism embedded within our society. So it felt eerily prescient hearing Rodney Spivey Jones, who you'll see in the clip we're about to show, read the afterword of his senior project entitled Messianic Black Bodies. In Rodney's words, everyone, every single one of us should seethe when injustice is rampant and bodies are falling and the nation is divided about whether the losses of Eric Garner, of Laquan McDonald, of Mike Brown, of Trayvon Martin, insert here, are worth mourning. Over the past month and a half, led by the Black Lives Matter movement, we have seethed at the injustice represented by the losses of, where Rodney says, insert here, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade. We say their names, we mourn them. It is not lost on any of us that College Behind Bars highlights two parts of our society where structural racism is most evident: mass incarceration and education. Tonight, though, we're celebrating a remarkable program that demonstrates the transformative power of education and hearing from three extraordinary panelists in a conversation moderated by our own Rabbi Marisa James, CBST's Director of Social Justice Program. But first, we're going to show you a clip of College Behind Bars. If you've seen it, the familiar faces will make you smile. And if you haven't seen it, watching this and hearing tonight's discussion will make you want to find it on Netflix as soon as we're done. Thank you all for being here.
I've spent more time in prison than I did in the free world. I came to jail when I was 17 years old. So it's like freedom, it's hard to visualize for me.
I've been incarcerated for 13 years. And from my experience, I can tell you, prison is here to punish us. It's here to warehouse us. But it's not about rehabilitating. It's not about creating productive beings. It just isn't.
This is my cell. This is where I rest my head. You have my sink, my window. You see I don't have much of a view of much out there.
We're going to start coursework Monday morning. This is a full-time and long-term and total commitment. When that door closes, you're at Bard College.
Several of you have in the past referenced things like W.B. Du Bois' double consciousness, right?
A lot of the stuff that I was reading, I couldn't understand what it was. You know, it would take me 2-3 hours just to get past 2 pages.
Anything, everything you believed or was taught to believe, none of that matters. It's like all that's bullshit. Now I want you to read with like a fresh slate.
So what else I have, you know? So U1, A1, U2, A2, so U3, A3, and plus now U4, A4. Okay? And
so you're
this
collecting
one,
the terms?
Mary Shelley with Frankenstein, she kind of put a critique on women and how they were like downcast, but Jane Austen is somewhat giving women some kind of power.
College, it helps us become civic beings. It helps us understand that we have an interest in our community, that our community is a part of us and we are a part of it.
Now, I was just thinking about this quote from a song of myself. I am vast, I contain multitudes. The individual is not just this set being. His relationship to everyone else and everything else in the world constitutes this oneness. What I do today may affect what someone is capable of doing tomorrow or vice versa.
It causes you to look at the United States differently. It causes you to look at politics differently.
Attention all inmates, line up on the white line by the rec room for the count.
It is balancing two identities, right? You're a prisoner and you're a student. I don't want to say all of the officers, and maybe not majority of them, but quite a few of them don't see me as a student. I'm a prisoner.
We have to remember that there are a lot of people who believe that what we do is wrong. But over the course of years that we have been doing this work, that the politics have changed at the local, the state, and the federal level.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. I don't care what you do. Take the computers, take the library, take everything. As long as I have my books. Exactly, they've done it before. And what did you guys do?
We wrote papers by hand.
Harvard, tell me this. How do you reduce class size in the face of the current influx of undocumented children in districts already suffering the effects of overcrowded classrooms?
So we were split as a judging panel, and the 2-1 split was in favor of Bard.
Because we're in prison, we're not animals. These green color, they don't define who we are. You know what defines us is our minds and our hearts, that we have moralities, even in prison. We have intelligent men, even in prison.
是几点去上课的？我今天9点去上课。
A friend of mine forced me into the program. It's probably the kindest, most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. It was forced me to apply to this program.
I came to prison when I was 16, right? I can't undo the 20-some odd years that I've spent in here. I would never, for the life of me, want to see another 16-year-old kid throw his life away.
They made horrible decisions that ruined not only their lives, but multiple people's lives. But a lot of them are trying to make up for it as best as they can. And they're trying to pay back to society.
I'm going home. I want my life to be a testament to the person's life I took. That requires working to the best of my ability and making my life itself a symbolic memorial to his. And that's the only way I'll be able to redeem myself in my eyes, in my family's eyes, in society's eyes. That's the only way.
I'm so happy. It changes your whole outlook on the world, period. You know, knowing that this is not the end for you.
So if you have not seen this 4-episode documentary yet, I really hope that you will, after this, run to go see it. It's really spectacular. So we are thrilled that Tamika and Dyjuan and Max, that you are here with us for this conversation. And we just saw a little bit of each of you in this trailer during the filming of this documentary series. So I have a few questions to get started. And I know that you all like talking to each other, so this should be fun that we all get the privilege of listening in on your conversation. For those of you who are participating in this, if you have questions that you would like to add to the conversation, please write them into the chat. We have a few questions from the ending mass incarceration team to get started. And then we'll take some of the questions from all of you. So Tamika, Max, and Dyjuan, I just want to make sure that you're all unmuted. And the first question I want to give to you is, Tamika, you're quoted in the trailer, we hear you in the trailer saying that this program and this education caused you to think about everything differently, about politics, about the world, about the US. And I'm wondering from both Tamika and Dyjuan, what does that difference look like for you now? And how has that difference of the way that you approach the world, the way that you think about the world, how has that driven what you've been doing now that you're here out in the world?
So, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. So at a time like today, with what's going on with this new worldwide Black Lives Matter movement, I notice I am now able to understand every single side of where each person is coming from. And prior to receiving the education that I received, I would have only seen it one way, from one side, right? So when I say it, it helped me to see things differently. Like, it helped me to notice that people are, people need to be healed. People have gone through a lot in this world. And it's due to, you know, the different forms of oppression that we've all have experienced. And people have yet to learn how to accept what's taking place. People have yet to learn how to express how they feel. And some people just still have yet to completely open their eyes and really acknowledge, you know, the way of the world and how much rules, regulations, and laws that was set into place has really harmed the human race. And, you know, prior to having this liberal arts education, which gave me a well-rounded perspective and standpoint from several areas, I wouldn't have seen it then. You know, I would have been the angry Black kid who was living still in pain and from trauma and from the weight of my ancestors and the different forms of oppression that was already, you know, set in play for me because of my skin color alone. I would have still been angry, and I would have not used that. I wouldn't have used it the way I use it now. Like, I wouldn't have used it in a positive manner. And I wouldn't have been able to understand other people and why they, you know, see things and end up doing things the way that they do it. So when I say it opened me up, it opened up my eyes. It helped me to really understand other people and why they do things. And it makes me want to wonder why and how to help to fix it.
That's huge. That's really the most important piece, right? The how to be involved in it actively. Dyjuan, can you speak to that a little bit?
I think I start by saying that it's unfortunate that we live in a society that is always doubting the efficacy of a liberal arts education. And I think it is in times like these, in moments like the present one, where we're dealing with systemic racisms and police brutality, in all of the things like poverty and economic inequalities that undergird those very, very pernicious systems, that I am grateful to have multiple vantages and perspectives onto what is happening in the world. You know, it'd be really, really unfortunate if I was just a math major, but no, having gone through going to a liberal arts school and, you know, taking anthropology and taking economics and studying art history, you see, you know, not only is what's happening today a result of police brutality, but to a lot of different things that are wrong with American culture. And so with that said, I think the most important thing for me and the relevance of the liberal arts for me is that it's given me the ability to apply, you know, my education in a broad way to my experience and to leverage my education to my experience to changing some of the things that we are now reckoning with.
Thank you. And it's interesting that that Tamika, you ended by saying, you know, how this is driving you to want to do things to help fix some of the problems in the world. I'd actually love if you could each say a word about what is the work that you're doing right now, and what do you hope the impact will be of that work?
Yeah, so as Lee mentioned, I am today the Government Affairs and Advancement Officer at the Barred Prison Initiative. And what that means kind of in the ground in New York is that I work with the City Council to allocate funding towards our reentry programs at BPI. One of the things that we found, if we want people to be able to fully leverage their college educations post-release, that we have to give them certain supports as they re-enter the community. And so over the past 2 years, the City Council has stepped up and given us our first, made the first investment ever at the New York City level into the very important work that we are doing at BPI, working on the state level to get them to support our programs, which they currently do not do. And then on the advancement side of what I do, that's more just coordinating with other college and prison programs nationally to advance Pell restoration.
That's great, thank you. And Tamika?
And as far as I am, so I work with Just Leadership USA, also JL USA. We're a nonprofit organization that whose goal and main mission is to decarcerate the US in half by 2030. You know, I don't know if people know, but the United States is the highest country in the world. Is the country in the world that has the highest population of mass incarcerated people. And, you know, it's mainly people who are Black and brown and from low income and impoverished communities. So we basically, well, my position, I'm a director of canvassing. Right, I do community outreach, and what that looks like right now is a lot of virtual conversations, a lot of virtual talks with people, trying to get them to understand the reasons why the PD should be defunded, why DOC should be defunded, why different bills and stuff should not be passed up on. So there's bills that are out right about now, less is more, less is more, hold solitary. There's just so many bills out right now where we're trying to help the communities. I'm sorry, guys, I'm a little nervous right now.
That's
I have a lot going on, so I'm a little overwhelmed, a little nervous.
You sound fantastic. I mean, we're just so thrilled to be learning with you. So just the nervousness will go away. We don't even notice it, I promise.
I know. Thank you. But so basically, right now we're just trying to get the communities to understand that we need more funding inside of our Black and brown communities so that we can no longer have to deal with the oppression of NYPD, of the criminal justice system, of the lack of education, of just all the lack of resources that our communities don't have. Where we've closed down Rikers, so well, we haven't completely closed it down because, you know, it hasn't, the demolition hasn't started, but, you know, we got the city council to vote on shutting down Rikers and doing 4 borough-based facilities. We've dealt with our Free New York campaign where we was working on bail reform and speedy trial and discovery laws. And, you know, right now they just did rollbacks on the bill reform that we had implemented back in January. And, you know, I don't think people really understand that the criminal justice system is really one-sided, right? If you don't come from a high class, or if you don't come from, you know, a white population, you don't have the same access to lawyers and, you know, fighting your case and the evidence and stuff against you. You know, people are placed higher inside of a facility where they're losing out on time with their family. They're missing days from work, which means they're losing their jobs. They're losing out on their housing and stuff. And this is all due to them being arrested and being placed and being detained inside of Rikers Island, where they're pre-trial. Like, they haven't been convicted of a crime. You know, no one has been said that they were guilty. The Constitution says you're innocent until proven guilty. However, we have like 70% of people that are sitting there that just was like, they were legally innocent, right?
The case of Kalief Browder is like I think the one that's the most heartbreaking. And this idea of, right, what do you do when this system, I mean, I thought it was so interesting that in the clip that Rodney says, right, this system is not about trying to rehabilitate people, it's about trying to punish people. But the punishment is not just the people who are going into prison. The punishment winds up being a communal punishment, as you're saying, right? That people can't take a day off if their kid is being arraigned for something. And regardless of whether there's any guilt, that the ripple effects on the schools, on the families, in communities that already are under-resourced in these major ways. And actually, Dyjuan, I want to say that in part of the series, I remember you saying that, you know, that in your youth, seeing how these things were impacting other people in your life, that you had written yourself off. And this idea of kind of, you know, when your whole community is sort of having the same expectations, that of course people are eventually going to wind up in jail. Of course people are going to not get the education that they, you know, at one time may have really been committed to getting. I would love to know from both of you, like what, and also from Max, we haven't heard from you yet, but this idea of rehabilitation, the idea of there being actual, I don't want to say justice in the justice system, but, you know, if the goal of a justice system is rehabilitation, which clearly we watch this series and that's not what happens for the majority of people, but I'd love to know what you think about, what all three of you think about the possibilities for rehabilitation, and what those possibilities could look like.
I think that, you know, the word rehabilitation is a little problematic in the criminal justice space, and especially when we're talking about the system that we call mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
Prison in this country has never functioned, is not designed to rehabilitate people. And then the question is to rehabilitate them to what, right? Mm-hmm. And so first, I'd like to put that out front. And then second, I'd also like to make very, very important distinction that, you know, prison didn't rehabilitate me in any way. You know, I sat in prison and went and worked out and went back to my cell and went and worked out and went back to my cell. And the prison was very happy to have me do that for 12 years, right? It wasn't until I was able to enroll and was fortunate enough to enroll and be accepted into Bard College that I could begin to change the trajectory of my life. And so I just think that whenever we're using words like rehabilitation, we just need to be more precise in actually what we're talking about and understand kind of the goals and how the system functions. Prisons don't rehabilitate people. Bottom line, right? That is not their goal. That is not their objective, despite what they say. And I don't even think they have the capacity or the expertise. You know, I did 12 years in prison and I saw a counselor once a year for 5 minutes, right? They asked me if my emergency contact number was the same and sent me back to my cell, right? And so that is the prison system. That is what mass incarceration look like. And if we're going to get out of this problem, right, it's not about designing prisons that can rehabilitate people. We need to fix the underlying problems that send people to prison in the first place, right?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi James, for having us, and to the whole congregation. It's terrific to be with you guys. I think that Dyjuan essentially hit the problem on the head, at least identifying our perspective on this. Words like rehabilitation, or even slightly more neutral ideas like transformation that people throw around in a kind of flip way, are vexing for us. You know, there is a long history in American punitive institutions having a pretense that they were there to fix people, to identify something inherent in somebody and to address that inherent problem. And to be frank, we find that ridiculous. But that is only one of the problems. The idea that people are in prison overwhelmingly because of individual behavior or individual choices fails to recognize or articulate the nature of what we now call mass incarceration, which is a system that's highly targeted towards particular populations of people, particular neighborhoods, particularly young men of color and communities of color, right? And we know that, and it's not like we know that, it's not like we learned that yesterday, you know, that's old news, you know. But also particularly this work, I want to just point out the other side of the ledger here. You know, we recoil at terms like transformation, but also we're in the education business. And even on places like Bard's campus, we are in the business of the cultivation or even transformation of a personality, of people's imagination, right? And we have to think, when we think about destroying mass incarceration, we also need to think about what comes next. And we need to replace these institutions, not with negative space that's going to be replaced by something else punitive or oppressive, but at least in my view, something that represents a deep investment in people and optimism about the future that I think Tamika and Dyjuan and I all believe liberal education represents.
Tamika, I'd love to hear from you as well, but I think you're still muted.
Sorry, thank you. So yeah, it's about prevention, right? There's a lot of social determinants, that a lot of social factors that that contribute to a person's incarceration or contribute to a person's decision making. And those are the things that need to be tackled, right? The lack of resources and lack of access to education and healthcare and good quality food and good quality living, like the lack of that access contributes to a lot of decisions that are made that are causing people to be behind bars, right? Then there's also other things like medical concerns, right? You have mental health issues, right? You have substance abuse issues, right? And these are needs and these are needs that need to be met. So if you take people and you put them inside of a jail and then a prison system, and there's nothing there for them, there's nothing there to help them with their substance abuse other than more drugs that prescribed to them. If you take a person and you put them there and there's nothing to help them with their mental health issues other than more drugs that are prescribed to them to have them like zombies. If there's nothing in play to help them with an education or to help them with a skill, you know, it still leads to what? Them coming home and doing the same thing once they need to have these needs met. So it's about preventing people from even having to make bad choices, right? And then it's about not isolating people. There's a lot of people who I realize have not been able to climb ladders because they didn't have people to encourage them. They didn't have the proper people, like teachers who should have been encouraging them. They didn't have that coming up, you know, in the communities that they lived in. They didn't have that coming up even in their households because they may have come from single parent homes and a parent may be incarcerated or something, right? So these needs have to be met when we're inside. So there's nothing inside of a prison or jail that helps to rehabilitate a person. Everything inside of that jail is to further keep them coming back because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? They have people inside making all types of things that you sit on when you go into city institutions, like the welfare, for instance. You know, I live in Staten Island. If I go in the ferry, there's Corecraft in there, right? These are things that are all contributing to the prison industry. These are all off of the backs of warehousing those Black and brown and low income people, right? So it's about putting that stuff in those communities, also having it inside of these facilities for those people that are in there. So when they come home, they have something underneath their belt. But then it's also about reentry, right? There's that's a strong thing there, right? People come home and there's nothing in place. It's hard to get jobs. It's hard to get housing, right? You go to parole and they want you to do a drug program and you already did the drug program when you was inside, but you need a job so that you can try to fit, so you can try to rebuild everything, right? And at the same time, I was locked up for 9 years. 7.5 years. There was a lot of things that have changed for me. Imagine a person who's been locked up for 20, 25 years, right? There's been so many things that's changed, but there's nothing in play to help them before they get out to prepare for that acclimation. And there's nothing once they get out here for anything like that, right? So we really need to focus on really building and giving that access to people, just giving people opportunity. Right? Prisons, they're really nothing for rehabilitation whatsoever.
So it's interesting because it feels like there's multiple levels here, right? There's the level of, we know that this system, as you say, warehouses people. That is its entire function. And at the same time, we're functioning in a way that we know that we can't just wipe the slate of the system, as Max says, and leave a void. And so the question is, how are we supporting communities to help prevent more people from becoming incarcerated in the first place? How do we help people who are leaving incarceration to be able to enter society and to return to their communities with some kind of tools to successfully come home, at the same time that we understand that this entire system is itself really a problem, and the entire system itself is causing all these problems. So it's interesting because BPI feels like it functions, it's like I feel like it's Jonah walking into the whale's mouth. And then somehow I'm gonna mix up my biblical metaphors and then having a dream. So I'd love to know, like, how, you know, with all of these different moving pieces, and I'll start weaving in some of the questions that I'm seeing coming in. There's a question about what are the greatest challenges that you create a bridge to help people when they return to society?
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah. Sorry, I will apologize. A friend once said to me, rabbis love words and we love stringing them together into long, long sentences. But yes, so the real question is, what are the biggest challenges of coming back to society?
Dyjuan, you want to jump in?
I think some of Wow, the biggest challenges are coming back to society. There's a whole bunch of them, but let's just start with kind of the resources you have coming out of prison, right? I did 12 years in prison, and I walked out the door, and New York State handed me a bus ticket and $40. That was it, after 12 years, right? And expected me to make my way in the world with that. Fortunate enough, I was able to avail myself of the reentry services at BPI, and that helped me along the way. But BPI can't help with my credit history, right? And those type of things, there's not the funding in BPI's budget to do housing. I've got to figure that out. BPI's helped me, find different jobs, and that's been real intangible, but that is a process. It's not like you walk out of prison and into a workspace. And so I think the challenges for anyone coming out of prison, I just like you all to say, what's been one of the toughest, roughest moments in your life when you've been unemployed, when you've been homeless, when you've been down and out, and magnify that times 10, right? Maybe that's some way to give you some type of vantage onto what reentering society is like. And then, and lastly, because I want to be quick about this, there's this idea that you walk out of prison, you just leave all that stuff behind you, right? But no, getting out of prison is a delayering process, right? I am still learning today some of the things that prison did to me, and the ways in which prison disciplined and habituated me in the world. And you walk out of prison, and the state doesn't say you see a social worker. They don't say you see a psychologist, right? They say you see a parole officer, and that person's job is to send you back to prison. And so getting out of prison, back into society, I can honestly say it was only successful for me, right? And the numbers, the recidivism rates reinforce this, because I had an education and I had a network and a BPI community that I can let Max speak to return to.
I'll just jump in quickly. Obviously, I can speak from lots of secondhand experience, but no firsthand experience about coming home from prison. But just the first part of your question, Rabbi, about how do we invest in communities to prevent this work? And just to point out that the question you asked is actually the answer to the question, right? We have in the United States it took a long time to get here, but a real bipartisan consensus that we have too many people in prison, that these prisons are inefficient, that they're cruel, that they cost too much. But there's no consensus about what we do next. We know everybody agrees, Democrats, Republicans, even the Trump administration, that they should be smaller. How much smaller? Most people agree a lot smaller. But what comes next? And I think in the last, however long it's been, 5 or 6 weeks, we've made a lot of progress in identifying pots of money that need to go to certain places. But just to say, making this thing smaller and less punitive is half, if that much, of the fight. It's reallocating resources to places where they have been taken from, and to communities that have been excluded from the best parts and most meaningful parts of American life. That's the answer. That's not the question.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have one more question. This is a really interesting one from somebody who is an elementary school teacher in Baltimore City, and who says, that given, I'm trying to condense this a little bit, given that so many people who are sort of in the prison pipeline come from communities where education has been so defunded, that, what would you have liked to see in your early education? And, like we talked a little bit, Tamika, about, hearing from teachers and getting the kind of encouragement that in wealthier schools and white schools is just taken for granted. But especially now with the experience and the knowledge you have now, like, are there policy things? Are there ways that people who are in early elementary education that you think people should be doing to help advocate for students in schools, that you think would have helped you, or that you think would now be helpful?
You know, I think Max kind of points this out all the time in relation to the work that we do. He's got a lot of awards for being ingenious and innovative, and as he would say, he hasn't innovated anything, right? BPI teaches a traditional liberal arts curriculum just in a non-traditional space. And so what I would have liked to see in my elementary school is the same thing that we see in the elementary schools in wealthier communities all across this country. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We know what works, right? But we know that it only works for a certain demographic and population of people, and it works for them because they have the funding and they have the resources to achieve the optimal results, right? So in New York City, we spent more money on police overtime last year, enough money on police overtime last year, where we could have made CUNY tuition free, right? In New York State, we spend $3 billion on prison and $1 billion on SUNY, right? On higher education. And so it's a matter here of not that what we could be doing different, but it's a matter of priority, right? If we were prioritizing schools over prisons, we wouldn't have so many people in prison, right? And just to kind of dig back into history here, CUNY didn't become a tuition charging school until there was open enrollment, right? And so we started letting people of color into CUNY, and then they decided that we needed to charge for it, right? And so the system has been rigged in a way to disadvantage a certain demographic of people. And we know how to do the things well that make people successful in the world. And we don't do those in communities of color.
Mm-hmm. I've seen multiple times over the past year in very different contexts the idea that budgets are a deep reflection of values. And I will say, I have definitely spent more time looking at the New York City budget this year than I ever have in my life before. And it can be really painful to see, okay, where the budget lines are heaviest are what we're saying about our values as a society. And it's not pretty. Yeah. I've got like multiple questions. So I want to first of all say that so many of the questions are basically asking, what can we do to help? And I want to tell all of you who are asking those questions that this team, this Ending Mass Incarceration team, is just doing a terrific job working with reentry programs, doing a ton of education. You know, it's a really good way to basically listen to Lee and Lori and to start hearing about some of those opportunities. But I think that the last question I want to ask, and I'd love to hear from all three of you, is, and this is one that several people have also asked, what has been the impact of COVID-19 in terms of the work that BPI is able to do, in terms of what each of you, Tamika and Dyjuan, are able to do with the things that you're doing in the world? And do you think there's any chance that this could be one of those moments that could drive some positive change?
I think in my work personally at BPI, I spent a lot of time last year lobbying the state for funding and resources towards college and prison, and that effort was going very, very well. And then COVID happened and there was a huge budget deficit and we ended up not getting any state level money. And so, you know, COVID hitting and the budget cuts have had a direct impact on my work. Luckily, New York City, the city council prioritized the budget at the city level that protected programs like the reentry services division of BPI. In relation to COVID's impact on college and prison, one of the things that we have been very serious about at BPI in the past 20 years is not only, you know, offering college courses, but building collegiate communities in every facility we are in. And so we actually stopped doing in-person learning a little bit before they shut the prisons down. Our faculty and staff reimagined, reorganized coursework, printed everything out, gave very, very meticulous kind of instructions to students on how they could finish their spring semester in what we're calling distance learning. And, you know, we shipped off over 300 course package, started a weekly newsletter, and done various things to facilitate our students completing the spring semester. But at the end of the day, you know, those students have the resources amongst themselves. You know, they have tutors, they have study groups in that community, in each and every prison, where they can rely on each other to work through the courses.
Thank you. Max, you're muted, but Tamika, I saw you were trying to say something, and Max will get you unmuted.
So COVID has really dampened a lot of our work, because normally, you know, I'm normally in the community, engaging the community. I'm normally in City Hall or up in Albany lobbying or rallying on the streets, and you know, the voices. This is a new world now where, you know, our voices are being heard over the internet, and I honestly, I don't feel as if I don't feel like I get the I don't have the same I don't feel like there's the same results, right? When we're inside of an elected official's face, when right there in front of them, you know, they're on the spot. They have to give their real right there in that moment. When we're on a screen or something like that, you know, they can say whatever they want to say, and we can't stop them. We can't raise our hand in objection or anything, because they really can't see us, right? So, you know, COVID has really dampened my work in particular, but it also opened up some new doors, right? So we was able to reach a wider range of people. I'm able to sit down on this beautiful device and speak to people who are behind bars, right? So and be able to actually engage them, because that's the population that I'm serving, right? I'm serving those who are behind the wall, those who previously were behind the wall, and those who were pretty much bred into a society where they're supposed to end up behind the wall. So you know, being able to do things like the Freedom Now campaigns, when we were, you know, advocating to have people released from out of county jails and prisons, you know, who were because of COVID, you know, advocating for the fact that there's no way to socially distance inside of a jail or a prison or an institute like that, right? You're putting thousands of people at risk. At the same time, though, they were sneaky and they were able to do these budget cuts. And I feel like COVID made it so much easier for them not to give the actual funding that by right we should have been granted, right? By right, you know, our kids have lost more now than they already did. So the little $1 billion that, you know, the mayor so-called is giving us really isn't doing anything, because he cut programs like summer youth and stuff, right? He still took from schools and everything, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, you know, you asked if this is a time to like be able to change. This is a time where change is, I see the change happening. Yeah. And the change that I see happening is our younger generation, they're more boisterous. Our younger generation, they have more heart than my generation had. Our younger generation, they were more privy to this technology. So they can't be lied to the way my generation was lied to. And nowadays, they are standing up for what's right. And they're standing up in volumes, right? So I actually kind of want to think this time, like, I think what came out of this time of people having to be sat down in their homes, locked down, as kind of people equated to jail. It's not the same, but I can understand how some people may feel like it is. because they lived a privileged life before. So now this is kind of like them being in jail, granted. But from this time, so many people, especially our young children, have opened their eyes and have spoken up and have stood up. And it's happened all over the world. And I am grateful for that. So yes, I do believe that this right here, and of course, you know, the next few years, is the time for this change to happen. The work's not gonna be done, but I can see it getting done a little faster now, just a tad bit.
That's amazing, thank you.
I would just say that, just dwelling on the obvious basic point, that this is an especially terrifying and lonely time to be in prison in the United States. Probably anywhere in the world, frankly, but certainly in the United States. And for the community of us, of advocates and practitioners who do work in the prisons, but are not of the prison system, it's also a terrifying time because there has never been a moment when we were so ignorant, so out of touch, so unaware of what was really happening there. And that is disheartening and frightening. And we know things are not well, but we don't know a whole lot more than that. In terms of COVID, there's a lot more to say, and we've worked hard to do the best we can to keep our community together. But I would just add that things like COVID, crises of this scale, put systemic processes that are already happening into a higher gear. Mm-hmm. And one thing that we know is going to happen is that more of the way we educate people is going to happen less in communities and more often in forums like this, except for the most lucky and the most rich among us. And our goal after COVID as an organization is to be a prominent example, counterexample to that rule, providing people in all kinds of different institutions, prisons, but also libraries, community centers, etc., tuition-free college of the highest community-based quality.
Yeah. And Rabbi James, I know we're running out of time here. And before you call on people to support BPI, you asked them, you know, what can all of you be doing? I meet with all of your council members all the time if you're in New York City. And so you can send them an email, you can send them a letter, you can tell them to support programs like BPI. And I think in this moment, you can also tell them and should tell them to defund the police and reallocate those resources to the places that they need to be. One of the things that we do very well in this country is we criticize the gun lobby, and we see how effective the gun lobby has been in a very, very pernicious and nonsensical way. I think we have to be just as critical of the police lobby. Police have put themselves into school safety, lobbied themselves into school safety. They've lobbied themselves into homelessness services. They've lobbied themselves into mental health services. They are in all of these public sectors that they have no business being because they are effective lobbyists and they utilize a politics of fear. And so we all need to realize that. We need to be critical of that, and we need to put those resources back to where they should be.
Thank you. And get a budget that actually reflects real values, right? That's the goal. Thank you. I'm gonna we are at 7:02, and I thank you for hanging in a little bit beyond our time. It has been such an honor to hear from all three of you. I will happily tell my council members and anybody else to listen to anything that Dyjuan and Tamika tell them. And Lori Magid, our co-chair with Lee Goldberg, I would like to give Lori our last closing piece.
So, Max, Tamika, Dyjuan, such an incredible privilege to hear your observations about how to make the world a better place, a more just place. At CBST, we try to always end our social justice events with an action item for all of us because the three of you are doing so much. But Dyjuan, you were just touching on this. Is there something specific that we could be doing? Is there legislation now at the state or federal level to return some of the funding. It's a whole generation ago, 25 years ago, since I understand that we really had funding for college programs, so that there's not just great BPI, but that there's college courses available. Is there something specific that we can be doing that one or all three of you can speak to, so that we go out there with an action item from this?
Yeah, I just say, again, you know, tell your council member they've been supporting BPI, tell them that you would like to see them continue to support programs like BPI. And at the state level, you can write your assemblyman, you can write your senator and tell them that it is a shame that New York State is not funding college and prison, that is not funding BPI.
Thank you. All right, well, we will at the very least be sending around the link to make sure that financial contributions, I know, are important to BPI, but we really want to get out there and try to spread the word, because it is just so unbelievably moving to see the power of education in so many people's lives.
And thank you.
I know that all of us are going to take a lot away from this as we continue social justice work at CBST, but I want a huge round of applause, jazz hands, for Max and Tamika and Dyjuan.
Thank you.
And for our moderator, Rabbi Marisa James, who is our social justice warrior, leading us on this effort and so many others on reentry and in many other areas of social justice. It's been a pleasure working with the staff at BPI, and I want to thank the CBST staff. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. For those of you that this is your first CBST social justice program, I hope it won't be your last. We have a very rich program of social justice online, and I really am hoping that in the not too distant future, I will see you at some of our social justice programs on 30th Street. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us.